Right, let's make a start. So welcome to the Week 10 lecture for Kit 711. We are going to spend today looking at two different topics. It's not actually going to be a very long lecture. The first half, looking at set, will probably take 30-ish, 30, 40 minutes. The second half, looking at tokens, will take even less time. So I imagine we'll probably be finished in about an hour and 20 or so. But before we get into that, on to some housekeeping things. We've finished our first two written tasks now, and our third is actually due later this week on the 10th of May. Our four topics are bit message, bit-torrent encryption, signal protocol and quantum key distribution. Obviously, you all chose topics weeks ago. Lots of you, I think there's like 40 of you have submitted already. So really it's not particularly new information, this, like lots of people submitted long ago. Over the weekend, that just... I was going to talk about... the next slide. I'm getting ahead of myself on slides. Over the weekend, you all submitted the case study. And people in the 9 o'clock shoot this morning got their case study back already marked and things, and this afternoon they'll be getting theirs. So over this week, I'll be giving out the case studies with feedback and talking to each of you in your practical classes. Tomorrow morning's shoot, I'll actually be a little bit late to do that because I've got another class, but I will appear and give them out and chat to the groups in that class. Over the next week, as you get that feedback, the idea is that with that feedback you make some changes to your case study to improve it. Now, some of you will have brilliant case studies that I'm like, this is well done, excellent, and very little feedback. Others of you, I might give you feedback saying you need to resubmit this in a week. Now, the vast bulk of you are not in that latter group. It's only when what they've submitted does not align at all with the specification. So the vast bulk of you, when you get your feedback, I'll be saying, oh, have you thought about this, have you thought about that, or maybe it needs a bit more detail on this or that other thing. Now, the idea of the case study and the description it provides is it gives you a foundation to then write the major assignment. And so the reason I'm so rapidly giving you feedback is that what I want you to do is to take that feedback on board, make a couple of tweaks and changes in the next couple of days so you've then established what your case study actually is. If you read the assignment spec, it says that in the big submission, the case study is submitted again as an appendix at the back. There's no marks allocated to it, but it's just as much as it's a reference for you now moving forward, it's a reference for me when I go to market that this is the case study that your other document is based off of. So the case study you've submitted is not particularly perfectly captured, this is exactly how it will be, but actually it's going to be tweaked a little bit. And I suggest you do those changes the next week or so, and then you then base the rest of it on it. The most common feedback I've been giving so far on the 15 or so I've marked so far have been around the amount and usually the complete lack, not complete lack, the lack of detail around the kinds of ICT infrastructure the company has and why they need it. The whole point of the case study is to establish what is the company, what ICT do they have that enables them to do what they care about, whether it's making ice cream or mattresses or developing software or providing cloud service, doesn't matter what it is. Whatever that thing is, it's being supported by ICT infrastructure. And so the case study should really be showing how that does that. At this point, I think, across the 15 I've marked so far, I think the ones that tend to describe it the most are the ones that are probably to the rest of you a bit of a surprise. Things like a pizza shop and an ice cream manufacturer have probably been the ones so far best describing their ICT infrastructure. And when I read one about a company they're developing software, I often read it and go, I've got no idea what their ICT infrastructure is. So when we go to look at it, that case study should really make it clear what is their infrastructure, why do they need it, what's it providing. So yeah, I'll be giving that feedback out and I'll be giving you some written stuff directly onto your physical submission, and I'll be giving that to you, but I'll then also verbally say more comments to you in groups as I come around every tutorial class and hand them out over the next week. Yeah, if we've got a good foundation as to what those needs are and what they're providing, the major assignment becomes easy. That's why I'm giving you that feedback. If you've been very fluffy in the description, oh, ICT improves efficiency, and that's all you've said, it doesn't enable you to write a good major assignment. That's why I'm giving the sort of feedback that you need. All right. In terms of peer assessments, lots of you have done, over half of you have now done peer assessment. I think the week 8 practical class has now had 130 of you do peer assessment, which is good because you've got to do it by tomorrow. Tomorrow it gets cut off. But actually there's now a whole bunch more peer assessments there. Last week's practical peer assessment went up last sort of Wednesday about the same sort of time, or maybe Thursday it went up. But as of this morning at 9 a.m, this week's one's up there, and the case study peer assessment's up there. So there's now been 4 different peer assessments released on WebPA, 2 of which happened at 9 o'clock this morning. So none of you know it exists yet, that's fine. But those are there. If this is the first time you're hearing about peer assessment, I suggest you get off your butt and check your email and go and log into the WebPA. You'll need to be on campus to do it and actually do that assessment. The 3 for the practical class are how the assessment's being done for those practical classes. You know how in previous practical classes you've had to show work to tutors and that sort of stuff. For the 3 practical classes around the assignment, the tutor mark doesn't matter, the attendance doesn't matter for that. This is how we're doing the assessment for those. So how have your group members said you were in that particular practical? So we're using that for that, mostly as a practice, because that actual tutorial marks are worth a tiny amount. Each individual class where you've then showed your work to a tutor or you have your peers assess you, it's worth a fraction of a mark. It's not worth very much. But in the major assignment, that's worth 20%, the 5% for the case study is as well, but in that major assignment that's worth 20%, the big document during week 13, half of it's individual mark based on your chapter, and the other half is a group mark. And so the peer assessment there will actually be a longer, more than the couple of questions you've got so far, around how you've worked in the group and those sorts of things. And so that group mark is going to be a multiplier based on your peer assessment. So these couple at the moment are kind of practice runs for the one that matters in week 13. Okay? Mostly because I've never used this system before, and we're deciding whether or not the school's going to take over this system and get rid of that silly SSL error. But it seems like a useful tool that has some features that just Milo can't remotely do. And I'm just experimenting it with this semester because Matt uses it in another unit up in Matt Springer. And I thought I'd have a look at it. But yeah. Case study. Okay, written task 2. So over the weekend, I did my marking portion of that. On Saturday, it takes like 5 or 6 hours. But I got to read a bunch of your assessments. Generally, they were pretty well done. If I look at the average for the class, though, it's actually about the same average as the first written task. So the average is still about 72%-ish, about that, same as the first one. But if I actually look at this distribution of marks, on the first one, everyone was sort of in the 70s. And now what's happened is it's sort of split a bit in that a whole bunch of people who got 75 on the first one are now HDs. You've got way more HDs this time around. like 3 times as many HDs this time around than the first one. But at the same time, had like 3 times as many people fail than failed the first time. So we've sort of gone from being this nice little centre bump to being zhunk. There's still lots of people in the 70s. And so if you have resulted in either of these shifts, you've gone from a distinction to a HD, you can pat yourself on the back, you sort of saw how people were marking and stuff and adjusted what you did. People who failed, what that means is probably you didn't adjust, and that there was then feedback from me in the lecture about how people should mark based on the marking I saw, and people have marked that way. You've not adjusted what you did in the first assignment based on my feedback, and now you've been penalised for that. So I suggest if you did fail or get a much harsher mark, you look at my feedback today, you look at my feedback after the first written task, maybe you shoot me an email or come and see me my consultation time, and we'll see how we can do to make sure this week when you submit your third one, you shoot back up again. Generally, the marking quality went up, I thought, on the ones I looked at, because I looked at lots of them. I looked at all the ones that had sort of problems where the marks didn't align and things. Generally, they went up, but some people are still really lazy. I saw some people that had copy and pasted the same across all 3 submissions, and so I just took marks off of them. So if your mark went down, it might be because you got penalised for doing a whole bunch of things I told you not to do, such as copying and pasting your marks across everyone. But the most frustrating part of it, which I know is frustrating for you guys as well, is when a person goes and gives feedback describing a problem in an assignment that is not there. People saying, this doesn't have academic sources. And then I go and look, and it's got academic sources. Or they say, this was really well cited. And I look at the document. Not a single citation in the document. And so what that means is the person writing the comment doesn't know what those things mean. It means their assignment itself probably has the wrong things in it, so they're getting a poor mark there. And then when they go and give feedback, they're giving feedback that's clearly wrong, and so they get marked poorly down there. That's probably why a bunch of people failed. Half of you have now educated yourselves on what's a citation, what's a reference. You do the correct thing. When someone gives you feedback saying you haven't, you mark them down, which is the correct thing to do. But in that person's original assignment, they've not done what they should have done because they don't understand those fundamentals. So I'm going to jump into a little bit on some of those and some examples in a moment. So the copy and so some students are still doing a bit too much copy and paste in their actual assignment. You should basically never copy and paste things into an assignment. If you forget to reword it, what you've got there are words that are someone else's words that you didn't write. That is technically plagiarism. And the key thing with that is you've even not done a good job at answering the assignment. When the person wrote those original words, they weren't writing them for your assignment. They wrote them for another purpose. So as you're writing your assignment and you're making an argument or a discussion about a particular point or a particular fact, using someone else's words who weren't addressing that, they're not actually going to capture it as well. So putting it in your own words actually elevates it to making it better. So by copying and pasting in, you're doing plagiarism, which means that if you then get caught by me, you lose a bunch of marks. And there was about 15 or so people who had that happen to them and they've been emailed. You've also not done a good job at answering the questions, so your assignment's not very good. That's then a problem. So just be aware of that. Comments on confused with sources. I saw a couple of phrases like this. Shouldn't use Wikipedia, it's not academic. Shouldn't use news websites, it's not academic. Wikipedia is not an academic source. News sites are not academic sources. This is kind of what we describe as being a half-truth, right? They are not academic sources. That is not wrong. That is correct. They are not academic sources. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be in your assignment. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Wikipedia particularly. It's a good thing to read to get a basic idea. Then you go and read the actual proper sources to get decent knowledge. when you're doing any kind of written report, I wrote a paper on Anzac Day. While you guys are all at home, I spent the day writing a paper. I wrote 5,000 words on Anzac Day from about 9 o'clock in the morning to about 9 o'clock at night. It had 70 references in this paper. 50 of those were academic. 20 of them were not academic. Still need to be there. Non-academic sources are still useful. You don't exclude them because they're not academic. It's just that in the marking scheme we've got, you're not getting marks for them, right? When you were in primary school and you went and wrote a little report or something, or in high school you wrote a little report, and you used all sorts of weird sources and things, you might have had some references or your bibliography at the back, and your teacher's like, you got a bibliography? Tick. Didn't care what was really in it. Anyone can get a random website and put it down there as a source. It's not it's not high quality, but at least you're saying where the content came from. That is the purpose, to say where did the content come from. That should always occur. If you're writing about a news story, you have to have the news item in there. Otherwise, you're not actually saying where it's come from. So we should use all sources we use. All sources we use should be cited, should be in the references. In our written tasks, we've got marks for using a certain number of academic sources in addition to non-academic sources. Now, what I would suggest is that, yeah, in this kind of thing, you've only got a short number of words. Most of your references are going to be academic ones. But you should not be marking down a student who has 5 academic sources and 2 non-academic. You don't then mark them down for including the 2 non-academics. That is not correct. All 7 should be there. All 7 is correct. And they've got lots of peer-reviewed sources, so that's good. But those non-peer-reviewed sources should still be referenced. I think I've said that. Someone got marked down, and I fixed it, for using poor sources. These are not academic sources. They had like 2 journals, and then they had a bunch of government reports and legislation, and they got marked down for not having enough academic sources. Government legislation is the highest peer-reviewed thing there is. You've got 100 senators in an Australian context reviewing a document and voting on it. You've then got another house that's got 70, I probably should know how many politicians we've got, another 70 people then voting on it. We've got 170 people reviewing it to say, yes, I agree with this, right? That is peer review at a crazy level. My paper I wrote last Anzac Day is going to be reviewed by 3 people, I reckon. That's typical. In academia, you have 3 experts review it. So if you're marking someone down for legislation that's had hundreds of people review it, you're kind of not understanding the entire purpose of peer review. I think that's cool. All right. Stop giving people who didn't give you feedback marks. I saw a couple that gave 1 the first time around, and I said in the lecture, don't give them the 1 pity mark, because I've got to go and remove it. I saw a couple of people give proper level marks to people who gave 0 feedback, one of which was 94. Person wrote not a word of feedback, did not mark the assignment, and then a student's gone in to give feedback, 94. What? That's not a HD. They didn't frigging do anything. So don't give them a mark. If they didn't give you peer review, if they did not actually mark your assignment, give you feedback, 0. 0, not 90. For those of you who feel bad, that 90 has become a 0 now. I fixed it. Those sort of things do stick out. If a person doesn't mark any assignments and then they've got one of them's got 90 and the other 2 have got 0, the system tells me, hey, there's something funny going on here. Yeah, so I fixed that, so don't worry about that. Someone's not sitting on 94 for doing nothing. But yeah, don't give them the 1 either. That's just annoying. You shouldn't be stating the marks that you gave in the feedback. So if you're marking someone and about what citations and stuff they've used, you don't then go, hey, I gave you 67. Don't do that. Most people probably realise this, but I saw it happen twice and I was like, what? Okay, so this is a screenshot from someone's assignment. If we look at this, how many sort of peer-reviewed sources can we see here? Can anyone want to shout out a count of peer-reviewed sources? Yes, correct. Someone marked this as having 3 peer-reviewed sources. A peer-reviewed source is things like journals, conferences. The legislation's a good option of something that's a bit weird but is still a peer-reviewed source. If we look down these, they're all websites, which is fine because there's a source they've used. And some people, which I also saw somewhere else, is that they had a link to the journal article. They had the full proper journal reference saying what journal it was, and then underneath it had a link. And then one person did mark that down as saying, hey, it's all web stuff. So, well, the journal is on the web. That's perfectly fine. But if we look at these, The Age is a newspaper. HowToGeek.com is like a blog type situation. Search Security Tech Target is like an industry kind of blog thing. So none of these are actually academic sources. So just remember to look at them and go, what's an academic source? It should be clearly shown as being a conference or a journal or legislation for it to then be getting that peer review sort of stuff. But yeah, journals can still have a web link. Just actually read what the reference details are first. Does it say it's a journal? Does it say it's a conference? Yeah, I saw a couple of students give marks for citations when there was not a single citation in the document. This is what a citation looks like. So we get the author name and then a year, right? If you don't see anything like this in the assignment, they've not got any citations. And so we should have a citation. That then allows you to look at the references at the back and see, well, where has this content actually come from? And that thing I need online is now actually doing its thing. Sorry, I'll keep going. I'm just going to have a 1-minute break while I deal with something here that I need, and then I'll come back. Sorry, I'm just... crap, it doesn't matter. It's just dropped out. All right, okay. What we're looking at today. Secure electronic transactions, and then we're going to briefly look at tokens. I was going to rewrite the second half of this lecture on tokens, because you guys have all done a lot of you have done a second factor written task, but I didn't actually have time to rewrite this lecture now that you guys actually know more about it. So it's going to be a bit boring possibly, but it's a little bit around smart cards and RSA tokens. Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at SET first. Now, if we look at the kinds of scenarios where commerce is occurring these days, there's been a very dramatic shift across the last 3 decades, I suppose, maybe 2 decades, you might say, is where the bigger shift has occurred, with people buying things online. The richest man in the world at the moment is Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon. So he founded Amazon in, 96, 97, somewhere around there. So he founded the company he now has the year I left high school, and now he is the richest man in the world. That's a pretty dramatic shift to occur over that sort of time span. And it's through e-commerce. Amazon is the quintessential e-commerce company. You order a book, it appears at your house. During the 90s, this was sort of seen as being, this is the next big thing. As he's founding Amazon and all the other companies all get start up and start making money, this was pretty obvious that this was going to occur. And in that space, everyone's like, ooh, do we want to send our credit cards? How are we going to pay for things? How can we be secure in this space? How do we know as a business that when someone orders something, I'm going to get paid? As a consumer, as I give my details to this company, how can I be safe in some way and know that, one, I'm going to get my goods, that my financial details aren't going to be stolen, all those sort of base security concerns that realistically these days we're fairly happy with generally in terms of the technicality of actually ordering our stuff. Depending on who we're ordering it from, we might think, oh, I don't trust that company. But when we go to buy something from someone we do trust, like an Amazon, and we believe that they're going to actually send us our goods, the actual cryptography behind us buying that, we actually generally trust. Those sort of series of problems is what SET is looking at. As we look at ways of approaching this problem, there's a bunch of different protocols that could be used, and historically in the mid-90s when SET was proposed, there was a bunch of different protocols that could be used in these sorts of scenarios. Lots of them for credit card use, some for electronic checks, some for eCash, which these days has obviously rapidly grown with cryptocurrencies in that sort of space. But not many of them are really designed for application level solutions to just sort of occur in an integrated way. The default solution in this space proposed by Netscape in the mid-90s, at about the same time SET was proposed, was SSL. And we had a lecture about SSL the other day. As we talked about SSL, we did not talk about it as being the way to do e-commerce. We talked about it as a way of establishing trust between two parties. We talked about it as a way of establishing a confidential channel to transmit data. We talked about it as a way of avoiding man-in-the-middle attack kind of scenarios. That's really what SSL is doing. We're verifying who we're communicating with and then talking in a way that no one can interrupt and intercept our messages. That's how we talked about SSL. We didn't talk about it as, here's our e-commerce solution. However, that's actually basically what it's become. And we'll get into that a little bit more a bit later. What we're looking at in SET today, and as we go through looking at SET, I want you to keep in mind that SET is a failed protocol. SET is a protocol that was proposed, and we're going to see the list of people involved in proposing it, that actually we don't use. It might possibly still be used by some of the people that proposed it, the big multinational corporations that proposed it. But it was proposed in the mid-90s of how we should do e-commerce. At the same time, SSL gets founded for those generic purposes I just reminded you of. Siri, is it you? We've got these two solutions then. One is a generic solution and one that is really targeting those particular problems we just outlined. And what actually occurred moving forward over time was the likes of Amazon and other web players, they all adopted SSL. SSL is free to actually kind of use, but realistically very, very cheap to implement as well. SET that we're going to see, proposed by several companies that are all worth billions and billions of dollars, who proposed what looks like, and as we look at it we'll see like it's a fairly reasonable system, but they proposed it in a way where you have to pay to use it. If you're a startup, do you use the thing that costs you thousands or millions of dollars to use, or do you use the free thing? You go for the free thing, and that's how someone like Amazon can then actually shoot up and become successful, because they don't need to already be Walmart to be able to afford to pay for the system to do the e-commerce. And so if we look in a historical perspective, and that's kind of what we're looking at today, we're looking at a protocol that's actually perfectly fine and good, proposed to meet some problems, and it lost out against another protocol that was designed for generic purposes that was basically free to use. As we now look to where we are today, I'm constantly using this to pay for stuff. PayWave through my phone. A lot of you who have iPhones would use Apple Pay, that's using Google Pay. If we look at the way SET operates, those new payment things, PayPal as well, those new payment things actually share a lot in common with SET. If we look at them as a payment method, we will see that actually PayPal, Google Pay, Apple Pay, I think there's a Samsung one, it's called Samsung Pay, I don't know what it's called. All of those, if we look at them, not exactly mimic SET, but some of them share components that SET actually proposed. They're a lot closer in operation to SET than they are to SSL. What happens under SSL? If I connect to Amazon, I get a certificate, I know who Amazon is, I then am able to trust them, and I send my address. I send my credit card. I send the thing I'm actually ordering to Amazon. Amazon gets all of the data, stores my address, my credit card number, everything. It's just been transmitted through SSL and stored there. When I look at SET now, as we move through SET, what we'll see is that is not the case with SET. It is not the case with Apple Pay and Google Pay and things, that we actually have inserted Apple Pay or Google Pay often in the middle in there. And they actually get some of those data. And if we look at PayPal or Apple Pay, they're a better example than the Google Pay. We see that actually I bought some stuff last night randomly. I was waiting for some friends. A thing came up on my Instagram feed. I don't normally respond to advertisements, but anyway. I saw a thing, I went, oh, that looks cool, clicked on it, and then bought it, right? From a random website I've never used before. I did not register with that website. I said, check out with PayPal. I checked out with PayPal. All my details are actually with PayPal, and all that really actually gets sent on to that other company, other than PayPal sending them some money, not from my real account, but from PayPal, is the address to deliver it. There's a separation of some of the knowledge there. That kind of setup is what SET is like. And so as we go through this, that's what we're going to be looking at. What we have with SET is an example of using cryptography in a smart way to meet particular demands that different users have. If we look at the customer, the merchant, and the bank in a transaction, they actually have different things they care about. The merchant wants to get paid. That's really all they care about. The customer wants their goods and not to have their details then shared to everyone on the internet. And the bank just wants to keep control of our money, really. So those three goals are different. They're not necessarily competing against each other, but they are different. If we do SSL, it actually completely ignores that from these two perspectives, and we just sort of send it. SSL is not really providing any additional trust other than confidentiality of the data being transmitted across the internet. So SET acknowledges those different goals, and we'll see how it tries to actually meet them. It's a complete solution for secure internet use of credit cards. So it's a payment system designed to be secure for payments. SSL can move anything. It can move pictures of bananas or your credit card number. SSL don't care, it just does it. SSL just moves whatever you're sending it. This is looking only at the case of spending money and is designed for that. So it can actually be elegant around the way it does that. So it was proposed by these big companies. Netscape's basically gone now, obviously. But Visa, MasterCard, IBM, Microsoft. All of them worth billions and billions of dollars, proposing a payment method that would actually then still make them money on each payment. And if you look at what Amazon's goals are, this is a complete tangent now. If you look at what Amazon's goals are globally, they actually want to be involved in every payment. They want to be involved in every transaction. That's their lifetime goal, really. And so what we see here is Visa, MasterCard, IBM and Microsoft here trying to be involved in every transaction. If you earn a cent off every transaction that occurs online, you're worth an awful lot of money. That's what we're really doing here, an application level solution using cryptography for payment details proposed by massive multinationals. So because it's a complete solution, it actually can be quite complex. It means that you can do anything you want with it, and you've got freedom for creating what it's going to be. Whereas SSL, it's trying to be generic, it's trying to be broadly applicable to lots of things. It means that when you go to actually do payment stuff, it becomes very simplified for the kind of data you're moving. But as I said, yeah, it's not really used. Visa and MasterCard might use it and other things, but realistically it's not used. This gives you an idea of the age of it. It's got DES as its confidentiality mode for symmetric. So it's pre-AES being proposed. AES was proposed in 97, adopted in about 01-ish generally. So this was proposed prior to that. We've got SHA-1, X509, version 3 certificates. Don't particularly need to know any of that particularly, but this is just what our building blocks actually are. And its goals are to protect privacy of cardholder financial details from merchant while assuring the merchant of payment. So the cardholder, their financial details are going to be hidden from the merchant, but the merchant is still going to get paid. That's sort of overarching goal we've got, which sounds very much like PayPal, doesn't it? That's really what PayPal's achieving these days. So we're going to work through a couple of sort of descriptions of how it actually does what it does. So if we think of a purchase request, this is created by the customer sitting at a workstation, sitting at their computer, they want to buy a thing, they've got the set application installed, so it's more than just having a browser there. This actually is an application. They find the goods they want, and what they do is they create this purchase request that includes the payment information, name, order number, credit card details, and an order information with goods, the ordered, payment method and name. So this request contains two things, some order details and some payment details. And immediately, before it's even left the client, the customer, we can see there's a clear definition. We're going to see that these two things are going to go to different places. They're going to be treated in different ways. So we've got three bundles of info. One used by the merchant to send to the payment gateway, one used by the merchant in terms of the actual order so they can fulfill it, and we've got a customer certificate. So this purchase request, under the way it operates, the merchant never actually gets the customer financial details. They don't get our bank account, they don't get our credit card number, whereas at the moment when I go to buy something on Amazon, it actually has my current credit card number and my 3 historical ones before it because I never got around to deleting them. So it knows my last 4 credit cards. Here, the merchant never gets it. The person I'm buying the goods off never gets my credit card number. They never have it. I don't have to worry about them leaking it because they never got it in the first place. The acquirer, which is our way of sort of saying the bank, we'll get into some of these definitions in a minute, never has the order information. The bank never knows what I bought. It knows I bought something, but it doesn't get a list of these are the last 5 books I bought. Whereas often when we go to buy things, it might say what it is we bought. Or certainly, often when you get things, it says what it is in there, depending on what the seller has put in their transaction that they've then sent to the bank. A few other interesting details. We've got, each party's got 2 private public key pairs, 1 pair for exchanging session keys, 1 pair for a signature key. So we've got some asymmetric keys here. 1 for our confidentiality session keys, for exchanging those, and 1 for signing. We've got a dual signature that's going to be created here. And this is where we can see some elegant use of cryptography. We're doing this request that's this one concept to us. We're buying a thing, but it's got these 2 halves, the order information, the payment information. And we actually create a signature that's got a hash of each half that we then join together that we're then able to then sign with our key. So if either the payment information or the order information gets modified, it's easy to then tell there's been a change. And we'll see what this looks like in a minute. But what we end up doing is getting hashes of each half, join them together, hash that, and we get our message digest. And we then sign. So we've got our payment details, our order details. They get hashed, making our two different digests. We join them together, we hash them again, and then we actually have this combo hash that if there's a change in either of these, this is then going to actually reflect that change. And we actually sign this, we actually encrypt this with our private key. Everyone can open it with our public key that we've shared, but they know it's come from us. So what does the customer send to the merchant? The dual signature, the order information, and the digest for the payment information. So if we look at this, the customer is going to send three things to where they're going to buy it from. What are they going to buy? They're buying a laptop from, I don't know, Laptops Are Us, right? So they've got the order saying they want a laptop, they've got payment information about it, and they've got a hash of those two things combined. So to the merchant, to Laptops Are Us, we send them the combo signature, we send them the order information. We haven't sent them the order hash, we've sent them the order information. That it's a 15-inch MacBook Pro, whatever, with a couple of stickers. We've sent that information, not a hash, we sent that information, along with a hash of the payment information. So they can't get the payment details out, but they do have a digest of it. So they get this in clear text, they get this hash here, and they get this combo dealie here. Now, what that means is they can recreate this by taking the order information they've got, hash it, they're able to join it with the hash they've already been given, create that hash and produce that. They're able to recreate this integrity check to check that this has not changed, but they do actually have this hash of the payment details so that it is actually the complete transaction hash. So the merchant's able to compute that and confirm that there's not been any interference with what's being sent. So this is then the bundle that we then send on to the payment gateway. So what goes to the payment gateway? This time it's the payment information, not the hash of it, the payment information, the hash of the order information, and then our digital signature at the end. So the opposite combination gets sent to where we're going to get paid from, or where the payment is going to be transferred. So Laptops Are Us gets that first one. The bank, waving this around, the bank, our credit card company, gets this bundle. This bundle, it's just the payment information. How much money am I paying? Who am I paying that money to? When am I paying it even possibly? That, along with the digest of the order, and they're able to, again, recreate that combo hash to confirm that things haven't gone astray. So that's sent in plain text, but the digital signature is protected from change by the customer's private signing key. So other people could open this. They're actually able to open up that digital signature, but they can't modify it because it's signed with our private key. No one else has it. No one can get in there. So the payment gateway can verify, the merchant can verify, and realistically this relies on the infeasibility of merchant or acquirer, the payment gateway, being able to change the order information or the payment information and compute the same hash. The integrity of this system is built on the fact that they're not going to be able to modify the order and transfer less money or more money because of the complexity of the hash that needs to be produced at the other end. So what goals is it achieving? The merchant never has the customer financial information. The acquirer never has the order information. But the two are actually joined. They're linked to each other very strongly by that hash, by the customer. If we compare it across to SSL, I'm not going to read out this entire table. What we can see across these is a whole bunch of dramatic changes. Under SSL, our payment details are clearly going to the merchant. If Amazon got hacked tomorrow, all of our credit card numbers are known by everyone. That information is there. If we look at the way they operate from a technical perspective, SSL is occurring at the presentation and the session layer. They're down the stack. They're scooping up any data that's being transferred. Set is occurring at the application layer. It's at the top, requires software to be installed. That's actually what we're using to do that order. Now, as it comes down, the actual requests we're making from set could actually then go through SSL to the destination and then be fully secured with that as well. But the actual sharing of information, who has what information, is being limited by set, and we're therefore not allowing the merchant to see our financials or the bank to know what we've actually ordered. So large organisations, I've already basically said, like Amazon, used SSL. Went, no, set's too expensive, not going to use that. Requires all of our customers, who we don't know, who are just randoms online, to install this weird set software. We're not going to get them to use that. We're going to use SSL, and they'll trust us and use us, or they're like, nope, not trusting you, not going to use you. And what played out was enough people trusted Amazon with their credit card numbers, and SSL won. And not just Amazon, eBay. You know, list off any e-commerce website from the mid-90s. All those successful companies are why set kind of died, really. If we look at PayPal, Apple Pay, some of those different payment things, we see they're actually, the way they work is much closer to set than they are to SSL. They actually probably use SSL for connections, but in terms of where data gets sent, they're very much a trusted third party, sitting in the middle, hiding information so merchants don't get our details, and in some ways banks don't then get all of our details either. If I look on my credit card transactions on my banking website, I see PayPal thing appearing. I don't see who I bought the thing from through PayPal. And certainly not what I bought. So SSL is a general purpose protocol that's actually ended up beating something that was for a particular purpose. But as we've then moved forward 20 years, we actually see that this style of application is becoming more common. That people are like, well, actually, I might have trusted Amazon 20 years ago, but I don't trust the million more startups that are occurring now. I will use PayPal, I will use whatever else to act in the middle, to hide my details, and they're doing it in a very set-like way. Okay, we'll stop there. Maybe we'll just have a 5-minute break, purely because the second half is not going to be 50 minutes. If we have a quick 5-minute break, if anyone needs to go to the bathroom or something, and then we'll start back up again. So we'll start back at 4 minutes too. So what group number are you in? Good. I'll see you guys on email. Excellent. I just want to mark it tonight so I can give it to you in the morning. All right, so let's get going again, although before we do that, we'll quickly do an attendance. So log on to Milo, about half of you sort of already have. So grab out your devices, log on to Milo. How we going? Most of us logged onto Milo now? Cool. Okay, so today's passwords buffet. Okay. I'll jump back to the password if anyone needs it, but here's our magic word, nincompoop. We've got a Rubik's Cube. My shirt, a bit hard to see in the dark, but it is blue. And a movie that I haven't seen yet. Hoping to see it shortly. Looks very funny. All right. Is everyone done? Who's not done? Shoot your hand up if you're not done. 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. All right. Give me your hand up. You are done or not done? You are done. All right. Put it and if you're not done. All right. Cool. Okay, I'll just actually kill the quiz now. Who's still going?
Yeah.
3, 4. I want to do like a blackboard for Mr. Squiggle. Everyone done? Who's the no? All right. There we go. Cool. Okay. So, as I said, this part of the lecture will be a little bit on the shorter side. We've now done a written task where we looked at a whole bunch of different, very specific examples of two-factor. Last year, I had this in here as a little sort of short little lecture around 2 examples of two-factor that built on what we saw in week 2 around identification and authentication. Identification, authentication around something that we have. Now, these are becoming increasingly common, as we're all sort of aware, and we had our 4 different examples in that written task. And this is because passwords are generally pretty rubbish. Next week's practical, we're going to be looking at cryptography, and we'll see sort of an example of how hashing actually works and do a pen and paper exercise with that. But the week that follows, we're actually going to break a bunch of passwords. We're going to use a couple of utilities to break passwords. And from that, you'll then see, I now understand why we need second factor or why we need to have really strong passwords that are hard to break, that are hard to crack. So that's why we're looking at this, because of that increase of second factor. Now, Smart cards are an example of this, and I didn't look at this as one of your examples in your written task. This is an example of us having a physical thing, and a physical thing that the general population is very comfortable with. Smart cards is a very easy change, even though it took some countries much longer, America, to go to these kinds of things with credit cards, because we've had second factor bank cards for decades and decades and decades. We had a magnetic strip version and people got comfortable going to ATMs using that. So moving across to smart card based ones where we actually have on the little chip on them, which we've all sort of got, I've got like 3, 4, I've got 5 in here that are all smart cards, and I think my Qantas frequent flyer is as well. So I think I've got 6 smart cards in my wallet. They are incredibly common now. And how do they actually operate? What's actually going on there? We're just going to have an ever so brief scratch of the surface there. So on that little chip that's embedded into our plastic card, we've got an integrated little circuit, and that circuit has some storage on there and has actually, in some contexts, a little bit of processing power to be able to do things. So generally, the amount of storage we've got is pretty tiny. It's actually a little bit older than that. I'm not sure how high they go. They probably go much higher than that, but there's not much real pressure to put mountains and mountains of data on these. The original promise of smart cards, when I first heard of them 15 years ago, was the idea that we'd actually take our wallet and end up with one smart card that was all those things in one. I've got 7 smart cards in my wallet, so we've not really reached that dream, although we certainly can put things into our phones now. I think I've got about 6 different loyalty cards and stuff in my phone. So there's not a great push on these to actually up this amount of memory. It doesn't really matter. So there tend to be very small amount of data there that's actually being stored. We've got a bit of computational ability, but they're basically a self-contained little computer. When we think of computers, we tend to think of these, but actually each one of those, in some definitions, you describe it as a computer. It's got processing power, it's got a little bit of RAM, effectively. It's got some memory to be operating on with that processing power. It's not kind of RAM in that sort of normal context. It's got storage. It's a computer. That's what we've got, a self-contained little computer. If we jump back in time and think of what did we have in our cards before with the magnetic strip, all we actually had was a number stored in a magnetic strip. There's nothing actually particularly fancy about that. It's just a number that people couldn't read without a magnetic strip reader. It was just a little hurdle to get over. So they come in a few different forms. We've got contact and contactless ones. I don't particularly want to dwell too much in on that, but it's about the range in which they work. That to me is not particularly interesting. What is interesting is when, from a hacker perspective, you use larger antennas and then try and see how much you can up the area by which you can read things. And people have played around with the ones that are in the sort of chips that we get inside passports to see at what distance can we read a passport away, which is why they've got little special covers and things like that. So with the different forms, contact versus contactless, what we end up seeing is that the chips do look a little bit different. You end up with a different power usage on them as well. In terms of the actual physical structure, which you can kind of see by looking at them, we've all got them in our wallets, there's the microcontroller part that's actually doing the processing is not that big thing you can see. It's actually sitting underneath that. So that printed circuit sits on top of the microcontroller in the middle. We've then got a bit of glue holding it onto the actual card itself. There's an ISO standard that defines how it actually works, but what we look at it, the way it's structured here, a lot of it's about, because that chip's actually a little bit sensitive, and so the way this structure is around it is to actually try and protect it in a way and sort of make sure it keeps working. It's quite interesting seeing what people do with theirs. I've seen a bunch of people who've taken their card and just chopped it up and have just got the little circle bit that they then use as their credit card. They actually don't then have the full card because they just need the chip. But the whole big card around it actually makes it much harder to break. So I'm curious how often people's cards fail if they do chop them up. If we look at what's actually happening with them though, what we're wanting is a thing that we have that provides us with security. They're usually paired with a PIN, which is something we know to get access to them. But what we actually have with them that's a little bit interesting is on them is usually a bunch of certificates. When we actually go to then tap and pay, what's actually happening there is it is using certificates to actually capture that transaction and to sign that transaction for it to then shoot off to the bank and, oh, that's really Joel. It's been signed with the certificate that's inside of his chip on his bank card, therefore it's really come from him. The underlying cryptography is that kind of simple, sort of same basic building blocks that we're seeing in other places. Often then coupled with something like a PIN, just to add that little bit of something that we know. In terms of that secure transaction, what's it actually doing in terms of generic functions that chip's doing? We're doing data protection, we're identifying the card holder, we're getting mutual authentication. Because as we do that sending of a data packet from us to our bank to buy something, we've got certificates on there that represent us, and we've also got public certificates of our bank. So if we encrypt a little bit of data twice, i.e. our session key, with our private key and the bank's public key, what we've done with those two layers is produce a level of security that the only person that can actually take it off is the bank who has our public key and the bank who has their private key. So these double layers of encryption means that we get mutual authentication. They know we had to send it, and we know the only person that can open it is the bank. So by having those certificates there, we're able to get mutual authentication. We've got secure writing, which is by ability to actually then be sending messages and things like that. Certificate or signature, and we've got encryption of session keys. So realistically, it's all based on asymmetric cryptography and then generating session keys to then encrypt the data we're actually going to send. So we're able to actually send a bundle of data that's bigger with a session key that's just been generated for that one-time transaction. Now, with these, I said a PIN is the most common approach here. Moving forward, there's certainly been talks of actually having your biometric pattern then stored on the card as well. So instead of it being a PIN, it might actually unlock with an iris or a thumbprint or something like that. So the PIN is something that we know is kind of poor. It's not hard to watch people do that. I realised the other day, which is sort of odd, it's a bit funny it's recorded. I have a good friend that people constantly confuse with my wife. And they think that my friend and I are married when actually she's just like my best friend. But I realised the other day that because we spend so much time together, that I actually knew her swipe thing on her phone. So the Android, we put in the numbers and you can do a swipe pattern. I realised without even noticing I registered that information that I actually knew what her pattern was. I hadn't ever looked at it and thought I should remember that, but it was purely, I think it's this, and I was right. At which point the friends we were with then thought I was well creepy and that I'm actually stalking my best friend. But it was purely just, you see it and you remember it. Pins are actually rubbish. And we do things like our little swipe pattern for it. It actually makes it weaker because it's a bit like an S. Everyone sort of chooses the same sort of one, and we remember the sort of pattern that goes with it, and it actually ends up being weaker. using biometrics coupled with the smart card, if we've then actually recorded the pattern that is, say, our thumbprint, it then means that actually the person who has the card is then the owner of the card, and it's much stronger than having the PIN just by itself. Signatures I've already talked about a little bit. So this is using a public key infrastructure. This is using PKI, using a public key infrastructure to have our certificates. The bank would be our certificate authority that then enables the signing of these certificates to then be used to put on our cards. Already talked about signatures a bunch. So in summary, these smart cards are a great example of something we have. They're incredibly popular, they're absolutely everywhere, but they're not stopped. They're not at an end point. Now that we've all got these, moving forward in time, we'll start to see them become a little bit fancier. In all likelihood, we might start seeing some biometrics on the one we actually care about. In that context, it might be a scenario that the biometric is stored on the card, but not actually stored by the issuing authority. We might end up getting it in that scenario. So we're able to put it on there without it then being stored for privacy reasons by the bank or whoever. All right, on to our second little mini topic. We're looking at these. Now, some of you actually had this kind of in your things like this, one-time codes. Time-based one-time codes was one of the topics for one of the tasks. These are incredibly common. A lot of us might actually have them on our phones. I think I've got like 4 of them on my phone. So there's that one. There's the Blizzard one. So a lot of you probably have, get my number, log into my Blizzard account. Whoops. A lot of us probably have those for different services that we use that generates a number, and then we have to enter that number. It lasts about 30 seconds, and if we don't have that number, then we can't log in. The earliest ones of those I saw were these RSA tokens. I worked for a senator for a little while, early 2000s, and so it was like 2003-ish. And everyone in the office who could check the senator's email or send an email on his behalf have one of these to then be able to then authenticate. And so that's sort of 15 years plus now of these sorts of devices being fairly commonplace and accepted around certain office environments. So yeah, this number here gets generated and constantly changes moving forward. So some of you might have seen these, others might just have the apps on your phone type approach. Why am I talking about a brand though by calling it an RSA token? In terms of these tokens that get carried around, they're actually fairly dominant in that space, about 60% market share, which is fairly dominant. It is shrinking a bit, and I probably should have checked that number because it might be 50% now. I updated that 60% last year. The reason it's falling is not that some other company is making a dongle, it's more that we've got our phone-based ones. And so it's not hard to make a phone-based one. There's open source code you can use for a phone-based one, so you don't even need to make the entire thing from scratch. RSA itself is founded by 3 cryptographers that came up with an algorithm, the RSA asymmetric algorithm, which is incredibly common. It's used in all sorts of places as an asymmetric algorithm. VeriSign was started at RSA, and then they actually sold that off. But VeriSign actually was the largest certificate authority for a while. It's not anymore. So out of this company has come dramatically considerable security tools. We've got one of the biggest certificate authorities, an algorithm that's very commonly used, and a name that is synonymous with the most common dongle for one-time passwords. They also actually, interestingly, control 2 of the 13 root DNS servers. So when we talk about DNS, which is the domain name lookup, matching google.com to a particular IP address, Globally, there's 13 root DNS servers that sit at the top of that, and everything else is underneath that structure. RSA control 2 of those. So that's a large portion of the internet they're actually entrusted with. Again, that was actually last year or so. I picked that up. Maybe they've sold them, but I doubt it. It's a very important thing to have. So an RSA token is, again, something we have. Something that we have. It generates this code, we enter it in, and then it proves who we actually are. If we can't enter the code, they're assuming we don't have the device, we're not the actual correct owner of the account, therefore we don't deserve to log in. So it's proving we've got the actual thing, and not just a person who's just flogged a password. So these tend to occur and get used with passwords because it's a second factor. We need to have a first factor first to then couple it to have a second factor, and so we then have that as a multiple factor. So what's actually occurring? The user enters passcode along with their password they've seen on the dongle. The server then calculates what is the correct passcode for this guy to be entering right now. The server's not constantly sitting there generating numbers. It's just, here's a request, here's the number. Is that the right one? I'll look it up to see if it's the correct one for right now. And then it actually then authenticates. If the user actually doesn't do the correct one, then it's obviously going to reject. What's actually happening though with this time signature is we've got a little algorithm that's using time in conjunction with another bit of a seed that is sort of owned by that person to generate these numbers. And so at the server at the same time, they both have the seed that's used by that user, which is basically the key, basically the secret is what we're talking about there. That, coupled with time in the algorithm, produces the particular number. And so we're then able to check, is this the right number for this 60-second or 30-second window when coupled with the correct key, the seed that's actually starting off the algorithm. So in concept, it's a very elegant, very easy little solution. You can understand how it works. But what it actually presents is something that's very, very, very hard to break. And that's what we like. So the token itself includes the clock and a factory set encoded key. So if those keys get stolen, all bets are off. So RSA is a company that has, all these people with the same dongles, all with these different keys in them. The security of those keys in this server is paramount. If those keys get stolen, everyone's dongles are basically useless. So they're one of the foremost security companies in the world, and like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago maybe, was the RSA conference in San Francisco. It's in the top 5 security conferences globally, probably in the top 3, along with Black Hat and what's the other one called? Blanking on the moment. Can't think now of the third one. So if we think about the kinds of things they work on, root DNS servers, 60% of the market's secrets, effectively. Big algorithm, big security conference. That's why their name is synonymous with security and that sort of thing. In terms of the number generation, it's actually a variant of AES that's in there. So they've taken AES once it became standard, and they then played around with that to use it to generate that number code. So it's a variant of AES that can then actually spit out this number code. What does that mean? It means it's crazy fast. If AES is really, really, really fast for encrypting gigabytes of data, if your data is a time code and a key, it's happening really fast, which means that server handling all those requests is then able to then do it very easily. There's no concern then with the complexity at the server end. Strengths, dead easy to use. Senators can use them, and they're dumbest people around. One-time password, very hard to reuse. Even if you stole a number off someone's screen over their shoulder, in 30 seconds time or a minute, depending on how long the code's there for, it's going to be useless. So it's got very limited utility if you steal a number on someone's screen. The number I held up before is no longer valid to log into my Blizzard account. It was only valid for that sort of 30-second window. Weakness, RSA itself, this RSA dongle, is a proprietary thing. You have to pay for that. Basically, everything else I've shown you in this unit, it's been an open source thing. And that's partly why I've chosen them as well, to highlight that some things we use, and are very commonly used, are actually proprietary. So if we don't know exactly how it's working on the insides, what we're then doing is trusting the company that makes it, which generally in security is something we actually try to avoid like crazy. If we look at the Blizzard one, which is why I opened that one because it's in my slide, they're actually using a one-time generator that's open source. So in terms of how does the Blizzard one operate, and we're placing our trust there, it's actually, I can look at that source code. I could go to my office and look up the source code of the one that's in that app. They can be stolen or lost. So if someone steals it and it's sitting there generating numbers, they can then be us. If they know our password or PIN that it gets combined with, our security is broken. It's not this week, it's next week. Actually, it's 2 weeks from now. So passwords, as we'll see in a couple of weeks, have a range of security problems. Second factors a way of overcoming that, as we saw in that written task and today. Biometrics is another approach as well, obviously. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
What happens with that token when the battery runs out?
You get a new one. Yeah, from RSA, you get a new one. So the batteries in them tend to last a long time. They're like a year or 2 years. It's a lot of them you press the button and it then generates what it is now. So the main thing it's maintaining over that time is the time. And so they tend to last set periods of time. And that's then your length of using that key anyway. So there's no point having a battery in it that lasts for 10 years if you're only going to use the keys that's hard-coded into the chip for 2 years. Yeah. So there was something else I needed to say. Oh, just a reminder, everyone to do your peer assessment on WebPA. And I think that's it. If you arrive late, I chatted for the first 14 minutes, I think it was, about the case study, the written assignment, and things like that. All right, catch you later.